Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading, and then we examine a single relevant question that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Wendy Korbusieski, and we're looking at a passage from Psalm 105, verses 16 through 25. This psalm gives us an extensive list of reasons why we should be praising God. In particular, the list of reasons relates to God's activity in the story of Israel. And one of the things you find in the Old Testament is over and over again, even in the New Testament, you find the same thing. Their history is repeated. Before they tell you the very next thing, they are going to tell you all that has happened. And so this psalm moves through the history of Israel pretty quickly, but it doesn't mention God's revelation at Sinai or the nation's season of rebellion in the wilderness. The psalmist carries the story straight from Egypt to the land of Canaan. And so the purpose of this abbreviation is to focus on the reasons why Israel should be praising God. So verse 16 mentions that God summoned a famine on the land of Egypt and the surrounding nations. And there are several famines that occur in the book of Genesis. This particular famine, however, was sent by God for the purpose of furthering his plan for Israel. It was through this famine that Jacob's family, the early branches of the nation of Israel, found it necessary to travel to Egypt in order to purchase food. And through that series of events, Joseph is reunited with his brothers and eventually later with his father. Verses 17 through 19 recount the suffering of Joseph. In particular, verse 19 stated that God tested Joseph's character. In the original Hebrew, this verse states that God's word tested Joseph. The word that is mentioned here refers to the dreams that God gave to Joseph. God had shown Joseph that he would be incredibly successful to the degree that even his father and brothers would bow at his feet. But that prophecy, which was given to Joseph through dreams, wound up being the very reason that Joseph was sold into slavery. And eventually he gets thrown into prison. So God's promise of success is what tested Joseph's character. Joseph's character is shaped immensely by the suffering that he endured. But Joseph did not experience bitterness because of what he endured. What we know about Joseph's perspective he says about his own situation in Genesis 45, 7 and 8. He says, "And God sent me before you to preserve you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and ruler over all the land." In chapter 50 and verse 20, he says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." So the psalmist also indicated that Joseph tested his brothers for the purpose of teaching them through suffering. So he kind of plays with them if you read the story at the end of the book of Genesis. Verse 22 of Psalm 105 says, "To bind his princes at his pleasure and to teach his elders wisdom." So the first his here in verse 22 refers to Pharaoh. Joseph had the power to rule over and even correct the princes of Egypt. But the second his in verse 22 clearly refers to Joseph. He received authority to correct the princes at his own pleasure or his own will. And the change in the pronoun reference indicates that the elders could refer either to Pharaoh or to Joseph. If these elders are elders of Pharaoh, then this is a parallel restating that Joseph had the authority to correct the elders of Pharaoh. But if the elders refer to Joseph's elders in the reference, then the reference is to his brothers. In either case, binding is parallel with the process of teaching. So Joseph had learned that suffering teaches wisdom and builds character. And so, Wendy, I don't think any of us enjoy suffering.
That's not top on the list.
Right. And what people call suffering varies from person to person too.
Mm-hmm.
We often assume that God wants suffering to end completely.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think there's value in suffering?
Yes, there is value in suffering. I think it helps build resistance or stamina, if you will. I think it helps reveal things about you that you didn't know about yourself sometimes. It kind of helps you understand um, what you're capable of sometimes, things that you didn't really understand you were capable of. I think sometimes suffering creates more empathy in you, a deeper level of kindness in you, because you can understand the plight of other people because of similar sufferings sometimes. Um, I think suffering for some people is kind of like grab on the shoulder and a shake, kind of creates some clarity. Um, for the ignorant and the arrogant, that snap of reality that's needed sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it I have, kind of a mixed philosophy about suffering. I don't think necessarily, I don't believe that God is the author of those things.
Any of
All
those things?
No, I don't think suffering. I think suffering is a result of sin.
Mm-hmm.
Period. But I believe God can redeem it. He can use it. He sees way farther ahead than we are, and He knows what's coming. And He knows that sin's coming, and He knows there's going to be suffering as a result of that sin, and He's got a plan for it, and He can redeem it. Um, and and find the value in it and use it for His plan and His purposes. Um, this idea of suffering dialed me all the way back to when my kids were little, and specifically to parenting. I think this is where it hit my heart the most, um, because I thought I was being a great parent, especially when my kids were little. Uh, when they were struggling with things, even when they were like super small, like say something simple like a puzzle. Those little puzzles where they had the different, like a star, and you have to turn it the right way to get it
Right.
inside the box, or then the circle, you have to put it in the right shape to get in the box. And they would try and get super frustrated because they couldn't do it their first time. And so you'd pick it up and help them find the right shape and twist it the right way to get it in, and you like, so they could experience that level of success. But what happened is that over time, what was a puzzle became rescuing them from frustration as older kids, like helping them get out of a tree that they had got themselves in.
Mm-hmm.
That turned into middle school kids, high school kids, some uglier situations where they have put themselves in the fire, but I felt that I was doing the great parent thing by feeling the flames. They're in the fire, but I'm feeling the flames, and I thought, well, I'm being a good parent that way. And not until I realized they have not reaped the value of their suffering. I have created a dependency on me to solve problems for them that they should have suffered through.
Mm-hmm.
So the value of their suffering should have been felt as learning lessons, as
Right.
building lessons, as character lessons, as how to fight through frustration, how to solve problems on my own, how to suffer consequences, how all of those things. It was a foundational lesson that had to be learned later because
But isn't that common about most parents,
it
though?
yes, and I've watched um my son do that with his girlfriend's daughter, and I'm like, and so I had to sit back and say, no, stop. I've had the opportunity as almost as a grandparent role, if you will, to say, now this is why you don't want to help her. I get the luxury on this side to say, I know how desperately you want to help her fix that puzzle right now. Because it was the same thing, and all of a sudden it was on instant replay for me. I said, "Don't
Mm-hmm.
let her suffer, because as much joy as she'll feel when you help her solve it, it'll be 10 times more when she gets to solve that on her own, because she suffered through it and got to enjoy the success of problem solving on her own. So there was value in that suffering, value in that frustration, because she's learned something.
Right.
And it starts there at 2. But that's so hard,
Mm-hmm.
because you want to rescue,
Yeah.
you want to save.
Yeah, I think all parents fall into that trap. Sometimes it's for convenience sake, speed. Sometimes it's not even because of you're trying to save them.
Right.
It's like you only have but so much time.
Let's go.
Right. And they're not going to be satisfied until it's completed. So you got to help them, right? Whether that's healthy or not, it probably tells us more than we want to realize. One, we probably could slow down. That's the reality of it. You mentioned that suffering is the reality of sin. And over my life, I have had varying degrees of what I thought God was responsible for and what God allowed.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's not as clearly defined. I'll give you an example. So just this morning before we recorded, our reading was in Acts chapter 13. Saul and Barnabas get sent on this missionary journey, and they're called to meet. This person has a name that I'm trying to remember. Proconsul, I think, is the translation that I was reading. The proconsul. So they were a leader in that community, and when they went to see him, there was this sorcerer that was in the community that was doing all kinds of witchcraft, and I don't know what the right word is. They spoke against that sorcerer. And it says this dark mist came upon him and he went blind. And they told him he was going to be blind for a period of time. And the proconsul came to Christ because of it. It said he believed after that. It doesn't tell us what happened to the sorcerer. But it was interesting to me that in most of the New Testament, with rare exceptions, right? So Ananias and Sapphira would be a rare exception. This would be a rare exception. In most instances, all of the miracles were intended for people to believe, but they were all relief for the person, right? The lame person could walk, the blind person could see, the deaf person could hear, the dead person could be raised to life. Ananias and Sapphira's case, they died, right? But people believed.
Right.
In this case, he went blind. He didn't go from blind to see. He went from see to blind, and people believed. And it gives me pause to ask myself the question: am I as sure as I think I am about what role God plays in certain things? Because ultimately, I think what God's after is His will to come to pass. Whatever, there's a passage that I hear frequently people will quote that is similar to along these lines. They'll say, God won't tempt you. I don't know about that. So what it says in the New Testament is He won't tempt you with evil. That's what it says. But if you look at translations and how words are translated, it's almost the same exact word when God asked Abraham to take Isaac to the temple. As a matter of fact, the King James uses that word. It says God tempted Abraham. right?
Right.
We don't like that word because when we think temptation, we think sin.
Right. Evil.
Do I think God tempts you with evil? The answer to that is no. I think the scripture is pretty clear about that. But I do think he puts us in predicaments for our character to be tested.
It's testing, right? That's the word.
Tried by fire, as come out as pure gold. And we see that with Joseph. Joseph, everybody has different opinions about where Joseph lands, but as best we can tell, he always acted with integrity. Maybe not always with wisdom.
Right.
From the time he told his brothers about the dreams he had, that's not a lack of integrity. It's just a lack of wisdom.
Right. Didn't know when to keep his mouth shut.
Getting too close to Potiphar's wife could be a wisdom issue. It doesn't say he did anything wrong, but he was certainly close enough she got his coat. We don't see him losing his integrity. So I think God does test us to check our character, right? Because, well, I think there have been times where my character has been tested in situations that didn't really matter, right? So that I was prepared for times that it did matter for my character. And I don't think anybody likes suffering, but I do think no matter how you paint it, right? I do think it should bring forth good.
And it's like strength training. You're not going to get stronger if there's no resistance.
Right.
So sometimes if everything's too easy, there's no resistance, it's impossible to get stronger.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around our daily Bible reading.